In this video, I'm gonna show you how to make your own BO-KATAN helmet completely out of EVA foam. This one was a popular request from you guys, so I hope this satisfies you. If you want to follow along and make your own epic helmet, you can get the templates from my Etsy store, which is linked in the video description. And for the first week after this video comes out, the templates will be at 25% off. So go get your templates and let's make this helmet. After purchasing and downloading the templates, you can print them out using the settings shown in my printing tutorial video. Once your templates are printed, you'll need to trim off the border around each page because home printers can print all the way around the edge. After that, lay all the pages of the template on your table and tape them together, making sure they're lined up perfectly. Once that's done, it's time to cut out each part of the template. I like to cut the template into smaller pieces before cutting the parts individually. This step takes a lot of time, but don't rush it as the accuracy of your template parts will have a big impact on the final helmet. Keep these 3 guides close as you'll need them later in the build. For this build, you'll need 8, 5, and 2mm foam. To transfer the templates to the foam, I like to pin them in place with sewing pins. After that, I trace around the parts with a silver Sharpie. The templates have registration lines which help line up the parts when assembling them later on. Make sure you trace them on your foam. After removing the templates, you can elongate the marks into the part. Some pieces have letters that indicate which parts go together. I won't transfer them to the foam because I know how to assemble the helmet. If a part has lines or details on it, carefully cut them off and trace them on the foam. If a part has this logo on it, it means you'll have to trace it down, then flip it and trace it again to get the left and right side. Some parts have straight lines on them, so if it's possible, you can just fold them over to trace them down instead of cutting them off. For some other lines, you can use a sewing pin to mark holes along their length. And when you remove the template, you can simply follow the holes on the foam with a Sharpie. If your part has dashed or dotted lines, make sure to transfer those because they indicate outward and inward angle cuts. I did a mistake on this part. The inward and outward cuts should be flipped. I fixed that on the final template and later on in the build. Now all the parts are traced on 8 and 5mm foam. For this part on the 2mm foam, make sure to transfer this detail as you'll have to remove that part later on. This piece right here needs to be traced 6 times. And make sure you haven't lost this part as it's really easy to lose. There are 2 12mm parts in this project. Because 12mm foam is hard to get, I simply glued a piece of 10 and 2mm foam together with contact cement. And here are the parts on the foam. One of them needs to be traced down, then flipped and traced again. With that, we're ready to cut out all the parts. I like to use a craft knife and a box cutter. Make sure your blades are really sharp to get the cleanest cuts possible and take your time. Outward angle cuts mean that you need to angle the blade of your knife away from the part at a 40-degree angle. You still need to cut on the line. Here's what you should end up with. Inward angle cuts are the opposite. The blade needs to be angled toward your piece, still at a 40-degree angle, just like this. And here's how the cut looks. For those 2 parts, make sure you remove the half circle on both of them. Let's assemble the helmet, starting with these 5 parts. These parts have to be curved for everything to fit together. To achieve that, you can use a heat gun. Heat up the parts on both sides while moving the heat gun around to avoid burning them. After that, curve the parts on a round surface. If you're wondering, no, a hairdryer doesn't work for this as they don't get anywhere hot enough. Some parts like the dome halves and the faceplate need compound curves, and the side parts need simple one-way curves. To glue the parts together, I like to use Barge contact cement. Weldwood is also a good brand. When using contact cement, always wear a respirator and work in a well-ventilated area. The way contact cement works is that you apply it to the 2 surfaces you want to stick together and wait 5 to 10 minutes for the glue to become tacky but not sticky. Then line up the parts as well as you can and stick them together. Add some pressure for the glue to hold properly and follow the registration lines as you glue along the edges of the parts. Once both dome pieces are properly stuck together, glue on the faceplate, starting in the center and working your way out. The seams on these parts have to be as flush and perfect as possible because they won't be hidden by any detail part. Once the faceplate is on, attach the 2 side parts together and then glue them to the dome and faceplate. Here's the result. Now let's make the cheek assemblies, which should look like this. All you need to do is to glue the 2 parts together and you're done. Next, you can glue them to the helmet, making sure not to attach them upside down. This is where adding the letters to your parts helps a lot. With the base of the helmet finished, I wanted to refine the shape with my heat gun because it looks kind of lumpy right now. Heat foiling parts after assembling the helmet helps the foam relax and take on its final shape. Now this looks much better. To reinforce my helmets, I like to glue in corrugated plastic inside them. I glue them at the back and on the sides of the helmet using contact cement. Of course, this step is optional, but I highly recommend it. This is the frame of the vent piece. You have to round off the two long edges, and for that you can use a rotary tool with a stone bit. You should be able to find rotary tools for $20 to $40 that work pretty well on Amazon. After sanding foam, I always heat it up with a heat gun to remove the imperfections on it. With that done, I stuck a piece of duct tape behind the vent frame. This will let me more easily stick on the vents. I added two tiny squares of 2mm foam in the bottom corners of the frame to elevate the first vent piece. Then it's just a matter of sticking on each vent piece, trying to get the spacing even between them. Of course, the smaller vent piece goes on last at the top. And here's the final result. Now you can glue the vent on the helmet. I added lines on the final template to help you line up that part properly. The vent piece needs to be inset into the helmet. To get that, simply cut around the part with your box cutter. Then apply glue to the vent piece and the helmet and glue the part back in, but make it sit slightly lower than flush. And this looks pretty good. It's time to make the ear modules, starting with the lower half. Start by gluing the parts together as shown here, making sure to wrap the 2mm parts around the 8mm parts. If there's any excess material, trim it off. The 12mm piece needs two angles cut into it. I drew them on the foam so you understand what I mean. Go slow with those cuts and remove less than you need to. That's because after both cuts are done, you can remove the remaining material with your rotary tool. Next, give the part a quick heat sealing. The line in the middle is a V-groove. To get a V-groove, tilt your blade towards the line and cut halfway through the foam. Then flip the piece around and do the same to the other side. You should be able to peel out a strip of foam and be left with a nice V channel like this. Let's make the right upper ear module. First, you'll have to remove about 5mm of material from around the 12mm piece at an angle to get a nice angled top. Here's what you should end up with. Now glue the two remaining parts on top. The line on the bigger 2mm piece indicates the start of an angled cut from this point. Remove most of the material with your box cutter and then finish up with the rotary tool to get a nice clean result. Here's the final result. The left upper ear module is a little bit more complicated with 5 parts and a little magnet. You have to embed the magnet in the second 5mm piece at the center of the circle from the first 5mm piece. I did that with super glue and I hid the magnet with a piece of duct tape. Now, after gluing the 3 lower parts together and the 2 upper parts together, you have to add the angled top to the lower assembly. Once that's done, simply glue the 2 assemblies together. Just like the right ear module, this one is angled outwards from this line on the top. Here's what you should end up with. It's finally time to attach the upper and lower ear modules together. The upper ear modules need to sit on top of the lower ones. To make that possible, flip the upper ear modules over and remove some material with your box cutter. And here's what you should end up with. Now let's glue them to the helmet. With that done, the helmet is really starting to take shape. There's a big piece that goes along the back of the helmet. Before gluing it on, you can round off the edges all around to get a cleaner look. Then simply glue it on with contact cement. This looks pretty good. Those 2mm parts also need to be glued on the helmet, right behind the ears. Now let's make the rangefinder. Along with the 4 foam parts, you'll need the stem to be a rigid material. I decided to 3D print mine. Of course, I sanded in the print to make it smooth and I embedded the magnet inside to match the magnet on the ear module. This 2mm part has 2 raised dots, which I'll make using a leather hole punch. Then I cut out the oval piece. A 2mm piece behind this part won't fit because the walls of the rangefinder need to sit there. To back this piece, I'll just use duct tape instead. Then I simply stick on the 2 little dots in place. The rangefinder wall needs to fold on these lines. To achieve that, I trace the lines on the back and I cut V-grooves into the part. Just like earlier, cut towards the line at an angle and do the same on the other side. This will let you fold the part just like this. Simply stick the two ends of the piece together and glue down the 2mm part from earlier. This is the result you should have. Then simply glue on the 5mm part inside the rangefinder and this 2mm part on top of that piece. The final part to glue on is the stem, and I'll use hot glue for that. Add a lot of hot glue to get a strong connection and hold the stem in place while it dries so it stays straight. With the rangefinder done, you can push it into place on the helmet, and just like that, we're done. I'm really happy with how the helmet turned out. It's not perfect, but the details look great, the seams are generally pretty clean, and the helmet's gonna look even better with a nice paint job. Before doing any sanding or painting, let's do a final heat form to the helmet just to make sure the shape is as perfect as it can be. This also seals the surface of the foam, which closes the pores and makes it a better surface for the paint. Some seams on the helmet aren't perfect. The first step to fix that is to sand them down with a low grit of sandpaper glued to a rigid surface like a paint stick. I own an orbital sander which makes the process a lot faster, so that's what I'm gonna use. Here's the result we're looking for. To remove some of the texture left on the foam, you can heat it up with your heat gun. Next, let's apply a filler on the seams to hide them. I like this light modeling paste from Liquitex because it's easy to sand but stays a little flexible. You can apply it over the seams and smooth it out with water. Give the filler a couple of hours to dry and then you can sand it down with a sanding sponge. Because the filler shrinks a little when drying, I did the whole process twice. To seal the foam, I like to make a mix of Mod Podge with a bit of water and gray acrylic paint. It should have the consistency of 2% milk. I normally apply around 5 coats of it to get a nice and even smooth surface. There's just one issue, I forgot to cut out the visor. So after the first coat of Mod Podge was dry, I took out my box cutter and hobby knife and carefully cut out the visor. Really take your time on this step because if you mess up, you might have to start all over again. With the visor cut out, you can clean up the edges of the foam with a rotary tool to make them as clean and straight as possible. After a quick heat seal, I hot glued in a couple of supports inside the helmet so it keeps its shape during the painting process. After painting on 4 more coats of my Mod Podge mix, the helmet looks pretty good. The surface does have some brush strokes though, so I sanded the whole helmet with 180 grit sandpaper. The first color I wanted to add is the white on the front of the helmet. I used the painting guide included with the templates to measure the height of the half circle and trace the rest with the help of a ruler. With that done, I painted on 3 coats of white acrylic paint on the faceplate. Now it's time to add on the details. The spikes are all 1 inch apart from each other. I started cutting the guide to trace down each part of the night owl emblem. To get it perfectly symmetrical, you can cut just one side of the template and flip it to draw on the other side. I used 3 coats of black paint for the spikes and the V-shaped detail, and 2 coats of gray paint for the other details. Taking your time for this part will give you a way better result, and here's what I ended up with. Most of the helmet is a desaturated pastel blue, which I mixed from a lot of different colors of acrylic paint. After 2 good coats, I painted on the paint chips on the white paint, using an image of the helmet as a reference. This looks pretty good. The band around the back of the helmet and the upper half of the cheek pieces are a darker, slightly more saturated blue. After 2 coats of it, I added the paint chips for this color too. I also applied the dark blue in the V-grooves of the lower ear modules. The upper ear modules and the back vent are silver. For that I used Spastix Mirrorchrome paint, but any silver paint would do. After 2 coats of it and adding all the paint chips and scratches, all that's left to paint are the little black details on the upper ear modules. Of course, I followed the same steps to paint the rangefinder. To protect all my work, I'll apply a good coat of matte clear coat over the helmet. After that, it's time to weather the helmet. The first thing I did was to mix black acrylic paint with water and I applied that over the entire helmet, removing the excess paint with paper towels. The next step is to use black and brown oil paint to add what will look like grime and dirt in the corners and low spots. Just like the acrylic wash, you can remove the excess paint with paper towels. With that done, let's seal the helmet with one last coat of matte clear coat. The visor I used is a tinted grinding shield from Amazon. I traced the visor which was cut out from the helmet earlier and added a border around to glue inside the helmet. My visor came with a protective plastic, but if yours doesn't have one, you can cover it with masking tape. You can cut out the visor with a sturdy pair of scissors, remove the film from the border around the visor, rub off the surface with sandpaper, and apply contact cement on the border of the visor and inside the helmet. I added paper inside the helmet so the visor doesn't stick in place all at once and carefully placed it in position. I started in the center and then attached one side at a time. Make sure you take your time on this step so that the visor doesn't end up crooked. After removing the protective film from the visor, I cut out pieces of upholstery foam and hot glued them inside the helmet to make it fit my head comfortably. And with that done, you should have your very own all EVA foam BO-KATAN helmet. Here is the finished product, and honestly, I think it's my new favorite helmet. It was a pretty easy and fun build. The only time-intensive part was hand painting all the details, but it's a pretty relaxing process. Of course, you could paint your helmet with spray paints and get an even better result. I just wanted to go the more hands-on approach this time around. Anyways, if you want to make this helmet yourself, the templates are available in my Etsy store, which is linked in the description below. Now this is the end of the video. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed it, you can leave a like and subscribe to my channel for more cool builds like this one. And I'll see you in my next video. Bye.